welcome to Beyond the Ordinary Webcast Radio, KRSE. And we continue this broad scope of human evolution and the notion of not taking anything personally. Right here with your hosts, Nancy and Elena.
And more importantly, with Kingsley Dennis. That is so, it's always a delight. And I am still so happy to have found you.
Thank you, Ellen and Nancy. It's a pleasure also from my side.
So go ahead with that. That was you. We were right at the end of the program when you made that statement.
Yeah.
And
so it's been a cliffhanger since October.
Indeed, it's been a while since we've spoken together, and we did finish our previous conversation on that note, not to take anything personally. And now I'm not saying anything new. This has been around in various wisdom traditions for a long time. I'm speaking about it now because I think and I feel that it's even more relevant, because a lot of people, we are quite sensitive at this time. And I feel that what's happening in the world around us that we've touched upon before, but also which I feel is very important to stress, is that what is going on in the world around us is a part of our own internal processes. And so, therefore, we are so intricately entwined with the world around us and our inner processes. So therefore, the concept, the idea of not to take anything personally, I think is a bridge between those two worlds, the external world and the internal world. So because of a lot of things are happening now, and time and events and circumstances are accelerating, there's a lot of change upon us, the people are more sensitive to that change and external events. I don't think that's esoteric. I think that's quite understandable. And so when we are sensitive, we not only project more, but we pick up on people's projections. And so I feel that when we're in conversation with people or when we encounter people, we may get in conversations or etc. And it's very easy to feel or to sense that something has been directed at us, and therefore we take it personally, or we can take it personally. And I feel that that's not the intention, because everyone is dealing with their own processes. So a lot of the time we're projecting our own state of being, and we're dealing with that in our own ways. And it may come out in phrases which sound odd. It may come out in actions which may seem out of place, and I say it's possible that some of us may take other people's actions, other people's words, or even random anonymous events. We may take them personally and feel it's a hurt towards us. Now I would say that is not so. We have to understand that each person is dealing with their own path and walking their own path, and so much of the time what we manifest is the projection of what our processes of our being. So we're not directing at people specifically. It's almost as if we're making an echo for our own voice, so we can hear what we're going through. So at that point, I want you to say that whatever we're going through, whatever the impacts we receive, we should not take it as a personal hurt, because that easily puts us into a place of defensiveness, or a state where we may consider ourselves the victim. Now, the state of being the victim is an old energy. It's been with our societies for a long, long time, and it's an old psychology, and it's something that I feel that our human psychology has had to deal with a long time. But that energy is changing now. We're coming into a time of empowerment, a time when we are realizing the true potential and capacity that we all inherently have. And so any concept of personal hurt or feeling the victim is is a false place or position to place ourselves in. And in fact, most of the times, that's not the intention of the impact. And so we should rather turn it around. And each impact, if we feel it's a hurt, we should work with it. And we should look at it and see it as potentially neutral or something that we can work with. But we should not take it as a personal hurt or an insult. And that's why I say don't take anything personally. And that's nothing new. It's been around in wisdom traditions for quite a while, Nancy. Elena.
That is, see, you say it's been said and it is unknown, but there are things that are so valuable to repeat many times because it is right now very crucial, and to understand that we at once create and are affected by everything around us and everyone around us. It is a continuous exchange and makes it even more important to be aware of our thoughts and reactions and feelings.
That's an important point, the concept of exchange. Because my feeling is that we're moving towards a time where the authority of institutions will not hold the same authority. The authority will shift towards the individuals and us connecting together and exchanging together. And so we can hold our own authority. So that's why I say, for example, that these words are not mine. They've been around for a long time because I don't wish to take possession of any concepts or any ideas, because that's the old energy, the energy of possession, ownership. The energy we're moving to now is an energy of trusteeship, of custodianship, is that there's no one possession. There's no intellectual copyright of these ideas or spirituality or energies. You know, we can't say this belongs in a book, this belongs in an institution. There's no middle person anymore. That's why, you know, the feeling, the state, and the energy of trusteeship is to say, this is for everybody. I'm talking about this, but these are not belong to me. I'm sharing them. And I think that is an important thing to say, as you rightly did.
Yes, that's very true. And it's also about what we accept and what we don't accept, isn't it?
That ties in very closely with it, because the responsibility very clearly will be at our door. And there's a line from an American poet, Delmore Schwartz, who said, "In dreams begin responsibilities." So perhaps our dreams are starting to manifest now. And so the responsibility is in our hands, or as the phrase says, the buck stops here. And so if we are going to step into the role of participation, the role of acknowledging our position and our empowerment, then we also, hand in hand, have to accept our responsibility. And that's not only in actions, but also words and also in thoughts as well. And if the more that each individual is manifesting, and the more that individuals are connecting and being a part of the world shift, then the more the responsibility will be coming down from the top of the hierarchy and coming down to those people who are standing up and taking part. And so choice and clear thinking and responsibility and the heart are all very much a part of this, and really the same thing.
That's perfect. And I think it's also another reminder that has always been there, is to not view that responsibility as a burden, but as a privilege we are quite capable of undertaking.
I would agree with that, Elena. And it's a matter of vocabulary as well, because the energy changes as we also understand the change of vocabulary. And so, as you mentioned, responsibility often used to equal the burden, because responsibility was something we felt that an authority figure, as the classic phrase, obedience to authority. And therefore, if that was passed down to us, we felt it as sometimes a duty, sometimes a burden, sometimes a chore. Remember our elders saying, you have to do this, it's your responsibility. And as children or younger people, we felt that burden. So, but I feel that that baggage around that vocabulary will also need to shift. So responsibility should start, that vocabulary should start to emerge and embody, like you say, a privilege, a joy, a creativity. Responsibility for ourselves is a freedom, not a burden. And so that is part of not only the vocabulary shift, but the consciousness shift, the mindset shift. And this is all the new terrain that we're moving into. And so it is important to signify that we're saying these words, but they have a different energy.
Yes, and I think from here you can speak unless you have something else to that you feel is more appropriate at this moment, but about your book, your new book, and also your travels and what you are perceiving and feeling, that a shift towards hope.
Well, yes, thank you. And I say the privilege of our conversation is that it's very open, so we can dance around the subjects. I'd like, if I may, to start with your question about my travels, because, as you say, the question of hope. Now, the travels I've had very recently, the last travel was in India, and I was in more the South Indian part, around Bangalore and Mysore and Kerala, and I've traveled a lot also in the Middle East and North African countries. And this time I noticed a very different energy, and this was my first time to India. And what I noticed primarily was that obviously this is only my personal feeling, was that there was a lack of judgment between people. Now, we in the West tend to maintain a status judgment. Sometimes from people's career, we may look at a person in a suit in an office differently than a person doing a manual job or working outdoors. That's just a crude example. What I noticed in India, which was very clear, is that people accepted other people's functions and roles, and it wasn't a judgment, as if everyone under the eyes of God were equal. Now, I don't often speak in religious terms. Now, India is a deeply spiritual country, and they have hundreds of different manifestations of their principal gods, which are Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. And so those manifestations, people relate to that in all areas of their lives, and that is their principal connection. And so people on the street, I found them doing, almost walking through the street, almost barefoot and homeless, and yet the people that they interacted with would seem to be without judgment of the role they were playing. And so, and also my reaction to them, their interaction, they were smiling, they were offering their help, and as soon as I took a camera out, they were wanting to have a photo taken, and they were asking if I needed anything, any directions, could they help me? And so there was a kind of energy that was an acceptance of their position on earth, and yet as if their responsibility was their connection to their God or the connection to their spiritual path. And that was accepted as primary. And that seemed, I'm speaking obviously as an outsider, but that was a very different turnaround of priorities. Now, the priorities we have often is, our status on our social status, our interaction with the people around us, everything we do, the clothes we wear, our mannerisms, they give off a signal, they're a signifier, and we judge a lot by that. Now, when those signifiers are taken away, such as our financial security or etc., we go into a state of perhaps panic or an insecurity, and this is what a lot of people are processing right now with what's happening with the social structures, principally in the Western world, where those structures are externalized in what I found in India. The principal connection was, as I say, the inner connection. And so there was an atmosphere of hope, an atmosphere of there's a future, a great future that can be moved towards. And that should not be an obstacle according to what happens socially. So when I came back, I wrote a blog article, which I termed Crisis is a State of Mind and a State of Place, because I wanted to emphasize that what we perceive as our crisis or our perception of the social crisis is very much located to the mindset we have because of our upbringing, our social conditioning, and also very much of our social context and cultural signifiers. And we tend to project this crisis out onto the world. And that happens mostly in our media. Our media says there's a crisis going on, there's a banking crisis, and it talks as if this is the same around the world, and everyone shares this. Well, that's a misconception, and even it's a deception, because that crisis isn't shared through people's perceptions in other situations and other parts of the world. And I think it's important to understand that. We should not project this mindset universally onto the world. And so that was part of what I picked up in my travels in India, Ellen and Nancy.
Okay, and that is the perfect time to take our break here. First break. Beyond the Ordinary with Kingsley Dennis. How nice it is. What a lovely, lovely words you speak. Okay.
Okay, we are back with Kingsley Dennis. We just want to hear you talking. We love to listen to you.
So let us and our listeners hear about your book.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for giving me the space to do so. My most recent published book is called New Revolutions for a Small Planet. And I called it New Revolutions because revolutions has several meanings. One can be a social revolution. One can be a revolution in thought. Another can also be a revolution in orbit, a kind of cosmic revolution. And so what I talked about was that metaphorically we can see ourselves as going through what I called a collective near-death experience. Now, I don't mean that in a drastic way. Also, that near-death experience has been talked about in anthropological terms as the underworld journey. Joseph Campbell, the anthropologist, has talked about this. And it's also called the hero's journey. And now the hero has to go through a trial, which often is a dark one, such as the mythology of going into the underworld, Hades, and passing a series of trials and coming out the other side to the bright light and being a different person, being mature. So the underworld journey, the hero's journey, the dark night of the soul, the near-death experience, this is all the metaphor for a time of trial or a time of, let's say, test and transition before we mature. So I talked about that in the book, and that hero's journey also requires us that we transition from an old energy, an old mind, to a new energy. And so during that transition, often there's revolutions or great grand transitions that occur socially. And when certain social revolutions occur together, then it's a confluence of energy, a confluence of revolution, and it's quite monumental. And those revolutions are revolutions in communications, revolutions in energy, and revolutions in consciousness. And so I talk about those happening now, in that we're having a revolution in communications, and our virtual communications, our internet, they've impacted on us greatly. And I think I touched upon this before in our earlier conversation, in that there's a rise of our empathic mind, because our connectivity with people across the world, we're connecting through outside of mainstream channels. We're making many networks and many organizations. We're hearing about people doing great things across the world. There's a connection of our mind that's empathic. And so that communication has changed incredibly our social connectivity and our social resources. Now, at the same time, we're going through an energy transition. Now, this hasn't materialized fully yet, but we know for sure that we cannot continue through the old energy medium. Now, just as in the Industrial Revolution, in the past 150 years, we've accelerated monumentally because we shifted from coal to oil. Now, if oil had not have come along at that time, or our discovery of oil, then we would not have accelerated because of the inflexibility of coal. Today, of course, oil produces not only our energy, but our plastics, our utensils, our clothes, our fertilizers, our food production, everything. So we need now to enter a new energy revolution. And that will also occur with a change in consciousness, a change of worldview and perception, because we have to understand that we cannot have another epoch the same as the Industrial Revolution. This exponential growth cannot continue. We have to change our mind and our perceptions. And that's occurring greatly through our communications, such as we are having right now. And there's also a kind of our communications sees an energy change. So if we have this confluence of a revolution in communication, consciousness, and energy, that can trigger a monumental shift, a civilizational shift. And that, I feel, will be the next tipping point to take us further. Now, I also talk about a revolution in orbit, or cyclic revolution, because I talk about the yuga cycles. Now, many people in the West will be familiar with the autobiography of a yoga, and Yogasanda, who was very well known in the West. Now, who is less well known is his teacher, and Sri Yuga. And his teacher talked about, in a small book called The Holy Science, he made a very brief reference to the dating, the timing of the Yuga cycles. And according to Sri Yuga, he said that there was a time in the historical past of the Indian royalty dynasty where there was a break in the timing of the Yuga cycles. Now, he goes into this briefly because there was a dynasty changeover, and they did not continue with the dating. And so he says that many of the contemporary commentators on the Yuga cycles talk about us being in the descending of the Kali Yuga, the Dark Ages. But what he says, in fact, is we're further ahead. Although we are in the Kali Yuga, we are not in the descending part. We've been going through the ascending part for several centuries now. In fact, since around the time of the Renaissance. And he says that the aspects of the ascending Kali Yuga is that our coarse, dense materiality, especially our dense technologies, will start to move towards a finer, more subtle state. And we can see that happening now. For example, our coarse technologies. Let's take communications. Our coarse communications, obviously before was by word of mouth or hand to hand. Then it was the telegraph. Then we had, of course, later the telephone, etc., which we're still using. We've gone through physical infrastructure to cables. We spent the whole of the Industrial Revolution cableizing the world. Now we're moving towards, we have satellite, we're now moving towards Wi-Fi, and we're moving towards a connectivity without wires. Now, anyone living 100 years ago would see that as a finer infrastructure of communications. Now, imagine our technologies for another 20 years, where we'll be. So we can see this manifestation of the finer energies coming in to our let's say, physical plane. So I feel that there's aspects of the ascending Kali Yuga which were rightly picked up on. So if we look at the ascending Kali Yuga and not the descending, we are moving towards an accelerating period of energies impacting not only our social, cultural levels, but also our personal levels as well. And we'll be coming to a time where we're of greater awareness, greater connectivity to a source, our energy source, our spiritual source. And this is what I talk about in what I call polishing the bridge. We'll be moving towards a time where we can polish the communication to ourselves a lot easier. And it won't, again, I mentioned about, early in our conversation that we're cutting out the middle person. The empowerment come back to ourselves. We won't specifically need an external institution to represent a source of energy or power or spirituality. And so this is part of the ascending curve. So if we look at the revolutions ascending in terms of personal, subtle energy, greater personal interior connectivity, finer connectivity externally, our communications and our energy, I feel that we're moving in this century towards new revolutions. And that's what I talk about in different aspects in this new book.
That's very good. And what do we do about this addiction on the planet to oil and coal that brings great profits, huge money to the big corporations?
Well, that is part of the, I suppose, in a sense, a disruptive transition that we have to move through. Because for sure, the oil monopoly, and ironically, the large 7 global oil corporations are called the Seven Sisters, because they operate as a cartel. And this has been known for all the way through the 20th century. They are called the Seven Sisters. Now, what other Seven Sisters are there? Do you know of another Seven Sisters?
Absolutely. The beautiful constellation, which is a terrible thing to call the oil cartel.
Exactly. They're the Pleiades, our wonderful nearby constellation. And the Pleiades have played a large part in human mythology. And a lot of the indigenous traditions, and I talk about this in New Revolutions for a Small Planet, not only Mayan traditions and other South American traditions, but also the Aborigines as well, they talk about far human ancestors having a connection with the Pleiades. And there's also a lot of mythology saying that our solar system has a larger revolution, a larger orbit around a second major sun, which is Alclone, the major sun of the Pleiades. So Seven Sisters ties in, ironically, with the oil cartels. So going back to the oil cartels, they have suppressed any major shift towards the alternative energy because they will lose their monopoly. So this is a stumbling block. And, of course, we are surrounded by energy. The scientists call, again, they call the major 70% of the energy in the universe dark energy. In fact, it's luminous energy. And the ancient rishis of India talk about the fifth element, the four elements of earth, water, air, fire. The fifth element is the fundamental dimension, and they call it the luminous ether, and gave it the name the Akasha. And so we are surrounded by luminous energy, which our science calls dark energy, another irony. And so we have no known technologies publicly that are being used on a mass scale to tap into this, because we have been tied into a monopoly of this oil. Now, technologies will come along. A mindset, a necessity, a new consciousness will materialize, but I feel that it will not be overnight. I feel that my understanding is that this breaking away of the old energy monopolies will take 1 or 2 generations, and it will, because new generations bring in new consciousness. Now, one of the great fathers of quantum physics, I think it was Max Planck who said this. I could be wrong, but he says that people don't accept new ideas immediately. Often, they have to wait for the old guard to die away for the new guard to accept the new ideas. Now, I feel that is the case with the energy. With new generations arriving in the next 10, 20 years, these new generations will bring in a new consciousness, and the old guard of the old cartel lobbies will have a great resistance of these new generations who will be crying out for this new energy, and they will be the pioneers of bringing this technology forth. So I feel that we are in the grips of the old technology, and we may have to wait another generation before this starts to crumble, because oil is not the future. We need to move towards a new technology of energy, but not overnight, I'm afraid.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry. You're just on that wonderful right track, and I was just waiting for the next sentence there.
Well,
sorry for the pause there. It's true. Now, I don't feel that we're going to have to wait 2 generations, because that knowledge that is there has only been hidden and in many ways for control tried to be destroyed, but there's too many brilliant minds out there that know exactly how to do it.
I mean, they do know exactly how to do it. The difficulty is scaling up. And scaling up means, obviously, our oil has embedded our global society into it's called a locking. When many systems are locked in to a certain procedure. Now, oil is not only for energy and transport, as I mentioned. It's for most of the things in our houses, our utensils, our kitchens, our cosmetics, our paints, our plastics, so many things. And so the question is, what can replace this wholesale? Now, we are bringing in new energy. There will be new technologies. The time scale to scale them up to a global distribution and have an infrastructure that can operate these will take a little bit of time. But the other thing is that it's what I call the lone Tesla syndrome. Now, Tesla, the great scientist, he had this energy, but he was marginalized because he couldn't reach out and connect with other like-minded inventors. So he was ostracized, isolated, and finally he was, he passed away without seeing his great technologies being utilized. Now, in the generation to come, the lone inventor will be a thing of the past. We'll have distributed science, networked inventors, what I call networked tinkerers. All these great people who are working in their garages, etc., with their inventions, their technologies, they will be able to connect together and share their discoveries and have a platform to showcase them. Now, that is what's happening now slowly, that a few of these inventors are coming together and they're being bold enough to have a conference. There was a conference in November of New Energy in Holland, and a few colleagues of mine were there. And so they can put this conference together where Tesla couldn't. He was a lone inventor. So that, I feel, is the stage where we are at now, that these technologies and people showcasing these technologies can come together. But the ability to scale them up on a global scale and have the infrastructure so everyone can connect with this new energy technology, that will need the old cartel to really step aside. And old energy hangs on for a long time. So the one question is, I agree with you, we have the technology, and the technology is manifesting now. It won't take 2 generations. But to scale it up and to have it as a global working model and to replace oil on the scale that we need it to in many, many other systems will take 1 or 2 generations. But that's only my understanding. That's only where I'm coming from. Eleanor, you made a brief point before, just to me, about about communities and the energy. Would you care to repeat that, and I would follow on?
Okay. I told you, you can express it better. I think that what you spoke about, that it would take time as we know it, to restructure the infrastructure and have things available. And my feeling on that is that is a necessary thing, because it allows us as individuals and communities to have the time for contemplation, for re-energizing the within, and become more in tune with a future. And it's not to be, we don't have this, we don't have that. That's what preparation is for, is to know how to grow a seed, to do many things. And that will be a joyous step, because that is building that responsibility and that certainty that we have everything we need, what it takes to accomplish this. And so that moment, that long moment as it may be, I think is necessary.
And I thought that was a wonderful point, and I wish for you to express it again. And I do agree with that, Eleanor, because we talk about the acceleration in the world around us, and of course we do see this acceleration. But that doesn't mean that we have to be rushed inside of ourselves, because also what's happening during this process is that many of us are being called to question ourselves, our own priorities, and where we wish to go. And that takes stepping back. Stepping back within ourselves, stepping back from what has been termed the crisis, and evaluating ourselves, looking inwards, and visiting our integrity and our sincerity and our honesty. And that also means taking time out, going slow, and not being rushed into really looking at ourselves. And that is almost what we could say the eye of the hurricane, is that you have that center inside which is peaceful, and we should make ourselves that center, that we can look at ourselves and take our time and not have to feel obliged to be part of the acceleration, because that's a different time scale. The physical world is doing its path, and we have our path. And so in this time, now interestingly, we talk about the word crisis. Now, in Chinese pictograph, the word crisis has two icons or two parts of the pictograph. And one of those represents danger and the other represents opportunity. Meaning in crisis, we can have the danger or the opportunity. And so it's a moment of perception as well. And so opportunity, I would say, represents that part that we look inside ourselves to see how can we grow from this, how can we make an opportunity out of that. And so also that represents the opportunity to energize our relations and re-energize our communities. And I do feel that moving towards the future, moving towards a planetary society also means having a strong localized society. Now, I say that there should be diversity in unity. I don't wish to have a global world, a one standard for the whole world, a one franchise for the world, a Western model for the world. No, that's not what being human is about. So this diversity in unity. We're unity because we are one brotherhood, sisterhood, specieshood, but we have our localities, and we should celebrate our place. And I do feel that with such things as the new energies coming on board, physically as well, the energies of what works best for our location. What natural energies can we appropriate for our locale, and that will revitalize our communities. And also, through communications such as the internet, many people can work at home or away from the cities, and I think that will also energize local communities to energize their working patterns. So localization will be a strong part of that, I suppose, re-entering the self and looking at the self and where we wish to be. And that moment of peace within changing times can be a part of local re-energization too, Eleanor.
Yes, and here's another thought why I was so delighted when I asked you, what did you sense, what did you feel, what did you experience in your travels now, and the frequency that you felt, and that of releasing, of actually experiencing that people can be so wonderful and happy and satisfied, having no judgment of others. And I think now is the time to really embrace that and start cleaning the debris that is in our old thinking, old patterns. Because just think, then we will be more ready for that moment of revitalizing everything in ourselves and accepting the new and not judging what it's going to be or how it's going to be or what it isn't now. Just it is forward thinking, I think.
So true, and we have so much internal chatter in ourselves, and the world has enough static and electromagnetic noise and distraction and media. We don't need to add more to it with our internal chatter. And unfortunately we do, because it's very hard to notice internal chatter. So we do have to shift the awareness. And if we look inside ourselves, and this is a moment of internal spring cleaning, as you rightly say. And so looking at that internal chatter, one of the major chatterings going on inside our heads is judgment. Now, often it's subconscious. We don't notice it. We can be walking down the street and we're looking around, and then we see someone. We may make a judgment about the clothes they wear. Oh, that doesn't look fitting for this location, or that doesn't suit them. But we think it's just a little odd remark, but it's internal chatter of judgment. And so a lot of it we've been socially conditioned to have judgment of social status, because then that places us in the social marketplace. We have to compete. That plays into a whole ball game of commercialism, etc. But judgment can be a very small thing. A judgment of the way someone has their hair, the way our partners hold themselves, or these are just examples. And we don't notice it, but we should, because internal judgment, it blocks us. It blocks us from a contentment. I would say, how can anyone be truly content whilst they're still making judgments? Because if we're making judgments, we're externalizing, we're projecting, and that projection onto something outside, we're saying something isn't right or something should be different. That's a judgment, and so it's very difficult to be unconditional and non-judgmental. And I feel that to have a place to be relaxed inside of ourselves, to be without the internal chatter, without the internal nervousness, we should make an effort to, first of all, put our attention onto those moments when we're making judgments. Now, that doesn't mean castigating ourselves, like saying, oh no, I made another judgment, woe is me, I'm so bad. No. That's old programming. That's the the whipping ourselves for our sins. And I would say no. We need to just make a note of when we make an internal judgment and say, oh, I made it in this context. So once we've made attention of that, we spot it much easier. Now, for example, I make a slight example now. We have what we call perception sets. Now, for example, you want to buy a new car, and you've been looking around, and as soon as you decide upon a model that you want to buy, you'll notice that you see that model of the car all the time in the streets, when you never noticed it before. Why? Because your perception set has changed. You've put your attention onto that model. Well, it's the same with our thoughts. Once we put our attention onto a certain perception set of our thoughts, we notice it more often. We notice it in our heads more often. And so it's easier to catch ourselves out. So that's why we should be calm with ourselves and just say, okay, I have had that internal judgment, therefore next time I'll notice it easier. And the more you notice it, then the more that you can put it aside. And eventually you can put it aside, because your awareness is a very strong tool, and it will help you to deal with those internal thoughts. So, so first I would say, just make a note of our thinking patterns and don't berate ourselves. Put our attention there, because where attention goes, energy flows, and we'll realize that those habits of judgment will slowly decrease, because the attention spotlight has been there, and they don't like the spotlight, and they'll crawl away. So that's just my thoughts, Elena.
That's very true and very well said. We do need to apply our awareness and have our observer watching all this internal stuff going on, and then one might contemplate who is talking and who is listening to it.
Indeed so, Nancy. We have these internal watching tools, or our internal self, our higher self, and our higher self is waiting there saying, give me something to do, I'll help you. We don't have to, the higher self, we have this idea that the higher self takes, is not there. It takes years and years for it to manifest. And I say, no, the higher self is there. It's waiting for you to notice it and put the attention on it and say, look, let's work together. And, we should give a task to our higher self, such as put our attention onto our judgments. And we'll be amazed at how much help we'll have from ourselves, because we are waiting to give ourselves a task.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It is total awareness, being in the moment. And one thing that helped me in realizing and observing and catching even the subtlest. This goes across the board, on everything. But let's just take judgment. And when I looked at that and became fully aware of it without the castigation, as you say, but just seeing that it is pure ignorance and quite often learned, so it's not a big deal. I don't have to judge myself, but seeing it is just ignorant and very, very bad for us and everybody else. I mean, it doesn't bring anything good. Makes it a lot easier to let go of these things.
Yeah. And perhaps the best remedy for letting go, the best remedy for everything we've talked about today, whether it's not taking things personally, not being judgmental, the best remedy is laughter.
Yes.
Let's be gentle with ourselves. Okay, we slipped up, we made a boo-boo, we were judgmental, we took things personally. Okay, let's laugh at it, because we're human, of course. Let's smile and say, well, better next time, but let's be gentle with ourselves and have a little laugh and acknowledge that we're human and we need to grow. We don't start perfect.
Next time is the word, because we're right out of time here.
Well, let's end on a smile and laughter and say, let's be gentle with ourselves. A good way to end.
Perfect.
Yes.
And there is no end.
Thank you so much, Kingsley. We look forward to the next talk.
Thank you, Nancy Ellen. It's been a pleasure as always, and thank you to everyone listening.
Wonderful holidays
Yes.
to everyone, and thanks for listening.